welcome to those who are joining. This is the GRAD Partnership Community of Practice. And Amanda, if you want to advance the slide. I am Kelly McMahon, and I'm from the Carnegie Foundation for the Advancement of Teaching, and I will serve as the MC for today's party event. And we're going to hear from a speaker, another member of the GRAD Partnership organizing members, Bob Balfanz, who's he's the research professor at Johns Hopkins and the director of the Everyone Graduate Center. And we're getting a chance to hear about school connectedness and whole school strategies. But I also just want to take a moment to acknowledge some of the other organizing members of the GRAD Partnership. So Sarah Duncan from the Network for College Success, and Angela Jabarek from the Bar Center, Jenny Scala from AIR, Tara Madden, who I've seen here, hello somewhere, from TDS, and then Patricia Balana, who's also joining in from Johns Hopkins. Welcome, thank you, glad to have you all here. If you want to advance the slide. So GRAD Partnership for Student Success is really focused on partnering with communities to use high quality student success systems so that schools are empowered to graduate all students ready for the future. And we hope that that is also partly what brings you here today, because you too are working on that. And we welcome a chance for everyone to be part of that effort with us. Will you advance for us, Amanda? Part of what makes something a high quality student success system is sort of these four interlocking components, including having really strong relationships for students at schools, the information systems and readily information around predictive indicators, having response systems in place so that, that you have adults in the building who are responding to students in timely ways and learning how to make sure that we're serving all students better. And then the shared mindsets of those who are working, that it is proactive and not reactive, and that we have a continuous improvement mindset towards really making sure that we're developing schools and conditions that really support the success of all of our students. Can you advance for us, Amanda? So the GRAD Partnership in building these kind of high quality student success systems, there's a couple of reasons to join. Part of it is to have access to high quality tools and resources that we're developing and we hope to be sharing with the field. Joining this community of practice, which we know that is pretty important to learn from those who are also doing this work. Having access to technical assistance from those who are part of the organizing members. We all have a deep shared commitment to equity and anti-racism and a belief in student, educator, family, and community agency. And so it's a pretty powerful thing to when we bring groups of people across the country that can do this. And we know that we can do more together with greater impact than if we all try to work alone in all of our individual spots, particularly because so much of this involves learning. Our community of practice is really intending to connect people who want to implement, improve, and innovate on student success systems, or what in the past have often been called on-track or early warning systems. So we're focusing on calling those student success systems, but you may have, in your context, referred to them as on-track or early warning systems. We want to enable shared learning. So this is meant to be a space for all of us to learn together. And so as things are coming up, and this is sort of what makes things community-like, is when we can have informal sharing, but please feel free, and there's an invitation that as things are coming up, you may be bringing up things that you know something about and you would love to share that. So please use the chat feature. It's one of the great benefits. While it's disappointing that we can't all be together, and maybe someday we will, but one of the features of Zoom that we can take advantage of is that we can share things pretty easily. So please, as people are talking about things or sharing things, and you may have a tool or a resource or an article that really is compelling to you, please feel free to share that in the chat. And then also part of this is to really generate motivation and inspiration to continue to do a lot of this work around implementing and innovating and improving our student success systems. And then lastly, our community of practice is really as good as we make it. So it's defined by our mutual engagement. So we hope it's great to see people's cameras off, and we know that everyone's doing what they need to. And there's different forms of engagement. So we hope that you will continue to engage with us, and there'll be opportunities to engage with each other throughout this. So Amanda, next slide. As we engage with each other, just some community agreements for us that really this is about a we, not me sort of situation. So the goal is to kind of learn together, and we want to share our stories as well as the airtime. So please feel free to offer your stories for the purpose of we, but also create some space to invite in other voices and share the airtime. We want to accept non-closure. We're only meeting today together for about 75 minutes. So within this time, we may not solve all of the problems, but this is hopefully the start and the continuation of many conversations and opportunities to learn together. Putting forward just Chatham House rules. So as a community of practice and as we're learning, some of that can be also a sharing of stories of failure, because some of the richest learning comes from the things that we've tried and perhaps didn't go well. And so because as we're in this community space, if you share the stories outside of it, please use the ideas, but keep the details in the community. We don't need, telling folks like, well, over there at Smith School, you should hear what they do. Don't necessarily associate with that, but instead the ideas, right? And then share to learn. So the purpose of sharing is to learn together. And then lastly, let's make some room for joy. It's meant to be a community that we all want to keep coming back to. So let's have some fun together. Amanda, can you pass or the next one? All right, so today, what do we have in store for you today? So I just gave a little welcome and overview of both GRAD Partnership, but also just our community and what we're hoping to build here. We'll hear a little bit more about the context of specifically today's topic, and then we'll hear from Bob Balfanz on the whole school strategy, school connectedness, and also just other resources and tools that I think about a bunch of those things are going to be shared. Then there'll be an opportunity, we're going to send folks out into breakout sessions, and this is the community building part, an opportunity to share. There'll be some discussions around that. Excuse me, we'll close with thinking about what's next for our community and opportunities to just reflect together and close. So that's the overview of today's talk. Amanda, thank you. Just to get us and wrap our minds around today's conversation, that oftentimes we use terms around school connectedness and student belonging, and these terms can get interchanged, and Bob will talk about this as well, but I just want to put out some definitions and the ways in which the research has attended to these. So school connectedness is a belief by students that adults and peers in the school care about learning as well as about them as individuals. So that's directly tied to how students feel, and a belief that they feel that they have a connectedness both with adults and peers in the school that is focused both on learning and individuals. And then belonging is the extent to which students feel that they are valued members of their community. Those feelings may include understanding, respect, connectedness, mattering, and then also there's a lot of scholars that have put forward an argument that dignity is really at the heart of feeling like you belong somewhere, having a sense of dignity. And so they're really closely tied, but people sometimes use them interchangeably, and sometimes the research also treats these differently. And I just want to call that out. So we'll put forward these two definitions as a grounding. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Bob, who's gonna tell us a little bit more about these things.
Thank you, Kelly. Welcome, everybody. I'm happy to be with you today, and I'm glad you're all here, that we can share and learn and think together. Really, that's the idea of this community of practice. And Amanda, just go back one slide, sorry. What I'm going to do is I'm going to share a little bit of research and some tools about school connectedness and make the case how it can be a very powerful proactive and preventative strategy, in many ways the foundation of student success. And as I do that, I really encourage folks to share their thoughts and ideas or resources in the chat as we go. As I'm talking, please share your insights and ideas in the chat. And then as Kelly said, we'll have a time to dialogue with each other. But please make this interactive as we can as we go along. And I'm going to talk for about 15, 20 minutes, and then we'll get into some good discussion. All right, next slide, Amanda. So what I want to start with is tying together two ideas that sort of, we know that effective student success or early warning or on-track systems, are really the most successful when they're proactive, protective, and preventative, right? Not just sort of reactive or intervention driven. Typically this is described as a tier 1 strategy in early warning or on-track or NPSS systems. But in practice, we know that sometimes in the rush to provide sort of customized supports to students, they may be underlooked or undervalued, right? That yes, we understand we need to do this prevention, but we have this rich data and these kids in need, and we've signaled it, and we have this adult insight, and let's really get down to getting some customized supports for our students. And that's a central part of high quality on-track early warning student success systems. But I want to make the case today that really a bedrock of this work has got to be on the proactive prevention protective side. Right. Next slide. And I want to, this is not only an education specific thing. A number of fields are really coming together that the research really suggests that this idea of an ounce of prevention, right? So one of the oldest of sort of folklore wisdom, right? That an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, actually has a very strong scientific basis. So for example, the CDC, when looking more broadly at child and adolescent health, says that, typically for many years we would try, if a student is like smoking or experiencing violence or, having mental health issues, and we focus on that indicator, that challenge, and sort of narrow cast a solution to that behavior. But the evidence is pretty clear that the way to really make long-term and deeper and stronger impact is to think about enhancing protective factors that help children and adolescents avoid multiple behaviors that put them at risk for these adverse health and educational outcomes. So I'm just making a case. This is an idea that's cutting across many fields right now. All right, next slide. We also know that the pandemic is the need to build this idea of school connectedness, right? Last year, there were great hopes that this school year that just ended, right, would be sort of, not only a return to normal, but a return to better. And, many principals and teachers and superintendents we've worked with and that you've experienced firsthand, those of you that are teachers and principals and school folks on this call or work with them, is it was a tough year in many places, right? Most schools, in fact, from the most recent survey done by the U.S. Department of Education, indicate that there was an increase in fighting, chronic absenteeism, course failure, student social, emotional, and mental health needs. And the aha moment I had when trying to think about, like, why is this? And in talking to some, various teachers and principals and folks, was that this was also likely the year when positive relationships and a sense of connection between students and teachers and students were quite possibly at an all-time low, right? As a sort of unique feature of the timing of how people experienced the pandemic and the extent to which they had a lot of virtual schooling the year before last. That meant in many cases, like think about your typical middle school. Your typical middle school, traditionally, the sixth graders are the new kids on the block, the seventh and eighth graders are the old hand. Most of the school knows each other. It's the sixth graders that have to sort of integrate in, and there's often a plan for that. Well, in most middle schools, right, this year, the sixth graders were new, but so were most of the seventh graders because they had been in virtual schooling the year before. So now 2/3 of the students are new to teachers and new to each other. At the very time, we also know we had these staffing shortages, the inability to get substitute teachers in particular, which meant teachers had to cover classes, which meant they had less time to build relationships. So we had a point in time when kids needed relationships building more than ever, and there were fewer adults to provide it. Hence, it was likely an all-time low. And once you think about it last year in that circumstances, the extent that we had fighting, chronic absenteeism, course failure, and social emotional is just your standard fight, flight, or freeze response, right? To the lack of getting sort of essential needs met. So the pandemic has heightened the need, I would make the case, to build school connectedness. Next slide. So what I'm going to do now is say, okay, let's really try to make the case that school connectedness could be seen as sort of a universal student success strategy and sort of the bedrock of, as I said, sort of high quality, early warning, on track student success systems for our schools. So one thing we know is that feeling connected to school is vital to adolescent health, well-being, and educational attainment. And as I'm speaking, Amanda is putting the links to the various data sources and reports that sort of back up these bold statements that I'm making. But it's been shown to improve mental health, reduce drug and alcohol, teenage pregnancy, and increase the core elements of being on track, right? Grades, high school graduation, college enrollment rates. Next slide. We also know from the CDC that during the pandemic, feeling connected to school really mattered for teens. High school students who reported that during and this was the year before last, when virtual schooling was at its height, that if they felt that there was a person in the school they were close to, that cared about them as a person, whether it was virtually or in person, if they could say, yes, I had that person in school that cared about me as a person, whether it was online or in person, they reported half the mental health challenges of students who did not report that they had a person they believed cared about them and they were close to at school. And there's very few interventions, if you will, or actions, right, that cut something as important as mental health challenges in half. Now, the challenge with this, we're going to get to it, we're going to go deeper in the next slide in a minute too, is only half of students, high school students, reported having someone that they felt close to at school, and only 1/3 of minority students. So again, pointing to these large relationship gaps that existed pre-pandemic, as we're going to see in a minute, but got worse during the pandemic, right, and leave us now with a serious need to sort of rebuild those connections. Next slide. Another key piece of this puzzle, if we go back to our old friend, sort of Maslow's hierarchy and its sort of its various reinterpretations, is that we tend to, when we think of this, think about, yes, like kids need to be, fed, they need to be safe, and then we need to help them succeed in school. But the step that's really between that sense of safety and sense of basic needs being met and actually achievement is belonging. And sometimes if we try to fast forward from like, okay, we got safety covered, we got basics covered, let's go for achievement, it's asking a much bigger leap to happen in this hierarchy piece. We haven't built in that belonging step that is a clear driver of the ability to achieve. Okay. Next slide. And then the last point that I was speaking of is just the need, the sheer need and volume of the work we have to do to make sure all our kids feel connected to school, is that on one hand, we have science showing strongly that supportive relationships are almost a superpower, but school surveys show they're quite rare, right? And that's the gap, the work that needs to be done. So pre-pandemic, in 2016, a large diverse school district did some polling of the sense of connection and relationships with teachers. And they found that only 1/3 of middle school students had a strong relationship with their teachers. And that number dropped to 16% by 12th grade, right? So this was actually a minority, quite small minority experience, especially for high school students, to feel that they had that connection and those strong relationships with their teachers. And students from low-income backgrounds were reported even fewer than other students. All right, so what do we do about this? School connectedness, right? School connectedness is believing you are welcome, wanted, cared about, and needed in your school. And when that happens, school becomes a place you want to be, right? Think about it. If you believe a school is a place where people want you to be, where you feel welcomed, where you feel needed, where you feel like people will miss you if you're not there, that's a place you'll actually push and work to get to, right? You might even get wet at the bus stop because you don't have the appropriate rain gear, because you want that school is you feel so connected to, right? Whereas if you don't feel that connection and you're getting soaking wet at the bus stop, you're like, this is crazy. Why am I getting myself soaking wet for a place where nobody knows me, nobody cares, right? So, next slide. So what makes a student feel connected to school? How can we create this sense of connectedness that could be this cornerstone of sort of our student success systems? Well, there's really 4 things that drive it. And these are 4 things that are both doable at the school level and actually tractable at a school level. And that's why I think they can become a core part of early warning on track student success systems, because they're within the capacity of a school to do. And we can also keep track of which students this is true for and which it is not, right? To see where we're doing and where more work needs to be done. So the 4 things are, as we've heard quite a bit about already, have an adult in the school who they believe knows and cares about them as a person. That's really foundational. It's also important that they have a group of peers that they interact with and feel affinity with as a group, right? This is like peer support. This could be official things like sports teams, theater crews, clubs, or identity groups. But it could also just be a circle of friends, right? But it is a sense that you both have an adult who's going to miss you and care about you if you're not there, and you have some peers that you interact with in a sort of supportive way. Next slide. The 4th feature is that the fancy term is you're involved in pro-social activities. But what that really means is you're engaged in activities helping others, either directly through, say, tutoring or organizing or giving to a food bank, or indirectly by participating in environmental or social justice efforts. But it's this key sense, it's a key human thing that we sometimes think in the teenage years, like goes on the back burner because kids, it's about me, it's about, my life, it's about, it's an age when, at least superficially, right, kids are quite self-absorbed. But in truth, like everybody, they feel much better when they think they're doing something positive for other people and not just focused on themselves. And sometimes we even play into this, right? Because we say, this is about your future. It's about what you want to do. It's about where you want to go, right? We signal a lot of you, and we don't signal a lot of we. But the kids are saying, and science backs us up, that it's both the you and the we that matters. And there's even some interesting psychological research which indicates the kids will actually work harder on things like homework or studying for a test when they believe there's some benefit in that activity for someone beyond themselves. And then finally, the final piece of connection is to believe that school is a welcoming place and you're accepted for who you are. You're welcome for who you are. You don't have to change for the school to accept you. All right, next slide. All right, so let's look at some more practical approaches or applications of these ideas briefly. Next slide. So how do we make more kids feel like there's an adult who cares about them as a person? Well, first we have to ask for it. We just have to ask teachers and others, all the adults in the building, to reach out to the students who may have existing connections and provide some time in the teacher's workday for this to happen. It could be advisories, X periods, morning greetings, but the evidence indicates this is an important thing for school success. If it's an important thing for school success, we need to create the time and space for it to occur. We also know a little bit about what it takes to sort of maintain strong relationships. And again, these are rules of thumb. They're not like, hard and fast. If you don't do this, it won't work, and this is all that will work. But to keep those relationships strong, they do need to have some consistency and constancy. And this can often be sort of 2 short and 1 longer interaction in a week. A short interaction can be very short. Kelly, I'm so excited to see you today. I know it's going to be a great day. And it's a great day because you're here and we're all together. And I expect to see you tomorrow. And if you have trouble getting to school, let me know and I'll try to help you get here. 30 seconds, we're done. But at least once a week, you need something a little longer, sort of keep those bonds and connections going. Next slide. There's actually some good tools, and if you click on, and I think Amanda's putting in the chat, and we get the slides, we're sharing some change packages that came from some work on the network for school improvement. Yeah, one of the tools there is this idea of an actual relationship audit, and there's some tools and ways to do that, which is, at the end of the day, you're using Google Docs or some other digital tools, and you're actually going grade by grade to identify students who may not have a strong connection to an adult in the school, right? And then figure out what's the strategy to reach out to those kids. So again, this is back to the idea that this is actually quite tractable. If you get a group of grade level teachers together, they pretty much can tell you pretty fast who they have a relationship with and who they don't. And you can then quickly see who's left out once they all identify who they have relationships with. And there's also been some pretty good work showing that there's some pretty simple ways to build those connections so they don't exist, right? Because it's not as simple as saying, all right, go form a relationship with this person, make it happen, right? It doesn't quite happen that way. You have to have a reason to relate. And one of the ways that people have found that's very practical and easy to do is you have both students and teachers fill out an interest survey. And then you connect teachers and students with similar hobbies and interests. And when this is done, it brings people who would never expect together to be together. Because you find that a teacher and a student who on face value seem very by appearances or just a quick look seem to be quite different, but they both enjoy knitting. And then they can connect on the idea that they both like to knit or something like that, right? Some other shared hobby. Next slide. All right, so helping students interact with each other with shared interests. One thing that's really important about this as we're sort of rebuilding our student activities post-pandemic is it is an opportunity to make them more inclusive and not make students have to earn participation. For assorted reasons, some of them good, some of them driven by budget considerations. And it was a growing trend before the pandemic to sort of say, well, to be engaged in this club or this activity or this support, you need to have good attendance or be average or pay a $25 activity fee. And that tends to screen out a lot of the kids who need these activities the most. So we really have to see that these student activities are about building the sense of connection and connectedness, and everybody needs that. It's not something you have to demonstrate earning for. If you remember, that gets us back to that inversion of Maslow's hierarchy. We're putting achievement before belonging. We're saying you have to achieve, and then we'll give you a place to belong to. But really, we have to give kids a place to belong to so they can achieve. And so that's a way they need to rethink that. And this is a key place, right, to really involve students in identifying those sort of new activities and affinity groups. And even, you know, where possible, have them be student-led, right, to increase the number and range of possibilities. Next slide. Pro-social activities. Here again, if you, the man is putting in the chat, and if you click the activities, we have a change package, which gives a range of ideas of how you might approach this. But some things are, again, and this started during the pandemic, often organically, and it's something to continue, setting up peer coursework and homework hotlines, right? Many schools have used, they've worked with this idea of homeroom captain, sorry, you know, having 12th graders in 9th grade classrooms or 8th graders in 6th grade classrooms. And the idea is, you know, simply, they're like, you know, I'm the captain of this homeroom. And to be part of my homeroom, you know, you need to be here on time, you need to have you be ready to go to school, various things. And it turns out that not only is that engaging for actually the captains, it's also engaging for the students. And they connect in a different way than teachers do about, like, you know, this is, you know, you're part of my team, so you have to do this, as opposed to this is the rule of the school, therefore you have to do it. And here also it's important to think of activities that help others that can be accomplished by aggregating individual efforts, right? It can't always be, it's always necessarily always a group activity, but where are things where people can contribute pieces of a greater whole and then feel accomplishment of that greater whole. So, you know, the old-fashioned example of this is like the quilting bee, where everyone's quilting a part of the quilt. But there are many modern equivalents of that that we can think of. Right. Next slide. And then finally, that school is a welcoming place. And the first step here is really just good, open communication with students and families around actually some of those very first things in that Maslow hierarchy of sort of safety and basic human needs. And just really understand, like, do they have concerns about safety or transportation or learning environment or school climate? And my colleague at our center at Johns Hopkins, Richard Lofton, has done some really powerful work on this, talking to families in Baltimore City. And again, this is going to vary by place. So this really has to be done locally, because those underlying concerns will vary by the historical circumstances and current conditions. But when they ask the kids in the family, like, what do you want schools to do better? And, you know, they all thought it would be like better teachers or better curriculum. And of course, those were concerns and they were brought up. But cutting across all of that was like, you know, I want my students to be able to get to school safely. I want them to have reliable transportation, because in Baltimore City, like other cities, they take mass transportation, right? They don't have yellow buses. And mass transportation, oftentimes the bus is full, they'll just drive right by the kids, right? And then the kids are late because they have to get the next bus or it's raining. I want a learning environment that's not too hot or too cold. And so what's important about this is sometimes, you know, we're so focused again on what fundamental role of school is learning, teaching, learning, and achievement. So that's absolutely important that our focus is there. But we sometimes forget that for a number of students, some of those core needs are actually not being met well. And that itself can be a reason for them to be chronically absent or less disengaged. So it's important to really understand what are the concerns of students and families, and create mechanisms for that voice to be heard. And then once we do that, there are a range and a number of things of activities that build belonging and engagement. And again, we're including a change package with this that gives you a range of sort of tools you can use to sort of work on that. Okay. Excellent. So last 2 points here. Sometimes schools will need additional people power to keep all students connected to school, right? This is one of those challenges, right? If we're in a place where there's a lot of new teachers, there's a lot of transients, there's a lot of new students, it's a big school, you know, the teachers alone can't do all the relationship forming, right? If a teacher has 140 kids on a roll across 5 or 6 classes, none of us have 140 close friends, or very few of us do, right? That would be the exception, not the rule. It's not a normal, typical human thing to have close relationships with over 100 people. So in those circumstances, we have to think about how can we get community folks in the school in a reasonable way that's supportive, not distracting, that's much more positive than it is sort of requiring extra work. And so that brings up a new effort that's underway that I just wanted to share about, called the National Partnership for Student Success, which was kicked off at a White House event at the beginning of July. And really, it's a plan to make good on, if you stuck around for the 56th minute of President Biden's State of the Union address in February, he asked for a call to action for 250,000 more folks to volunteer as mentors and tutors in school and out of school. And this is a plan to help try to actualize that and get more people-powered supports in schools in 5 evidence-based areas. And all of these are the school connectedness in all of these. So, academic tutors to help, with the sort of instructional loss of time. But all we know about good tutoring is it works if there's a strong relationship with the tutor and it's connected to what's happening in school. Student success, which are really sort of a combination of academic and social emotional supports, and are sort of they're in the school. They have maybe 15 kids they support through the school day, so it's a higher intensity for when that's needed. Many of our kids, their visions of the future were sort of knocked back on their off balance by the pandemic and created a lot of uncertainty. So there's a greater need for post-secondary coaching and to supplement counselors, even though if we're adding a couple of counselors with the federal relief money, instead of having 500 kids, they now have 250 kids. Right? There's still a need to have more people who can provide that post-secondary advice. Wraparound student support coordinators to help connect those out of school needs to high quality supports, and then finally high quality mentors to really fill those relationship gaps. So this is an ongoing thing. We gave you a link to the website, just a point of awareness. This is a way to think about if you're looking to find additional people power to help provide some of the school connectedness and some of these student supports. There are ways to ask for technical assistance that's free, or just get some ideas and learnings from others that are engaged in the work. So I encourage you, if this seems right for you, to check out that website. All right. And my last tool, because I love tools that you can use, this is a new favorite of mine. It was done by the Des Moines Public Schools, just an initiative on their own, and they were kind enough to share it with all of us on the web. And what they did is they actually embedded the concepts of school connectedness in an attendance survey they give their secondary school students. So they're asking, it's a survey to give secondary school students largely about what makes you not attend school, what would make you attend school more often. But as you read it, you can see they cover all the bases of school connectedness. They ask about relationship with teachers, relationship with peers, pro-social activities, a sense of belonging. So this is a pretty good instrument to sort of connect school connectedness to really that leading indicator for our early warning, on track student success systems, which is regular school attendance. So that again is a good tool you might find some use for. All right. And where that brings us now is just something to think about to sort of make a segue into our sort of breakout groups and discussions. So, we know that everyone is under stress right now, coming from periods of isolation and uncertain about their future. And we know that when we're under conditions of stress and scarcity, humans focus on immediate needs, right? Getting through the school day, right? That's been the the story of the past few years. And that's all people could do, right? But when we do that, we sort of set aside acting on things that remain important to longer term success. For example, school connectedness, right? We're like, that's great, but we just got to get through the school day. But at some point, if we keep just getting through the school day, we'll never be able to really get ourselves out of this to the more thriving place we all want to be. And I would argue a key pathway to that is school connectedness. So that's making sure that all our students, especially the most vulnerable, feel connected to school, even when circumstances are challenging, needs to become routine. That's why my big push to make this just a proactive, preventative, universal student support strategy that we all do. It's like a foundational strategy, and we sort of try to do it universally. And that will enable us to make school connectedness a foundational strategy for high quality student success, on track, and early warning systems. So with that, Kelly, unless people want to ask a quick question, brief Q&A, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, that's what we're going to do is
ask
a question. So thank you, Bob. Thank you very much for all of that information. Just share it a wealth. And I too am really glad you're here, Bob. So thank you. So just want to open up for some clarifying questions. So just we can take one or two before we jump into breakouts and give people to really dig in and get a chance to engage with others around all the information that we just heard. So does anyone have any simple questions that you guys want to ask, any clarifying questions about what was there? And you can drop in the chat or feel free in this moment if you're welcome to, or you feel comfortable to unmute and ask your question. Okay. Well, I think hopefully that means that folks are excited to talk to each other. And so we're going to give you a chance to do that. So there's a big chunk of time. So we're going to spend the next 25 minutes in a breakout where you get a chance to dig in. So when you get into the breakout, you'll find some new friends. So spend a little time just introducing yourselves. I know that people have their names there, but say your name and then what brought you to the meeting. And then there's an opportunity to discuss, what did you hear that resonated? What are you wondering about? And then, try out this idea of what might you try? What might you take up? And what's nice about this community is we have a range of folks who are across the system. We have some teachers in the room. We have some people who are working at organizations like United Way. So we have lots of people who all have wonderful opportunities, and everyone, wherever you are in the system, have 3 feet of influence of what you might decide to do for yourselves as individuals in your work. And then as a group, what would be great is we're going to come back to this larger group. It would be great to hear, something that you as a group talked about. So as a group to decide, what's an idea or a question that you might bring back. So those are some of the things some work that you could do together in your breakout group. So say hi to your new friends, spend some time talking about it, and we'll send broadcasts in the breakout so you have a sense of the time so you don't lose track of it. And then, what did you hear? What was resonating? And then as an individual, what's something that you might try? And you could, talk to your new friends about this. And people may have ideas to help you since we're all bringing interesting things to this space. And then as a group, what's a question or an idea that you could bring back to this main room? Any questions about what we're asking you to do in the breakouts with your new friends? Seems good. Amanda, thank you for being a wonderful master of ceremonies. I think we're ready if you wouldn't mind sending folks to the breakouts.
Sure. How long would you like to go?
25 minutes, please.
Okay. And then we do have, while I get that set up, we have one question in the chat, Bob, that you might best answer. I believe there's some forms on partnership student success, but Lisa has asked, do you have a document or tool or examples that highlight funding streams to add additional adults to support connectedness?
Yeah, and I'll type in an answer. It'll be the easiest for you to do that.
Okay, we'll do that. We'll do that for when they come back. So
yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for your question. Oh, welcome back, everyone. Hopefully you had a chance to engage with people and that you weren't, cut off mid-sentence or get a chance to, finish your final thoughts if they were there. I know have a lot of gratitude for the folks that I was in a breakout with, and I just want to give a big thank you to Annie and Sonia for staying in there, and then Anu and Marva, who unfortunately had to jump out. But thank you so much for the rich conversation. If you want to drop in the chat some gratitude to your fellow conversationalists or new friends, please do so. And with that, after you do that, the next thing to drop in the chat, and so after people drop their gratitude there, if you want to, I'd love to hear what you're bringing back from the breakout. And so just we're going to do what's called a waterfall chat. So Amanda, if you'll advance the slide for us. So for those who have done this before, type it in the chat, but don't hit return. And we're all going to hit return together at the same time. So I'll give you a moment right now. I'm going to grab the thing that I'm going to put in the chat that's coming from the breakout. And so get ready, put in the chat, and then I'll tell you to hit return in just a moment. And then we'll see all of it. It'll be like a waterfall of lovely things that came from there. So please feel free to put that in there. It might be a long idea, so I'm stalling for a moment while you're typing. All right, hopefully you've had a chance to put that idea in there. And I'll go ahead, let's hit return and see some of the things that people are bringing back to the main room with them. All right. Bob, I didn't tell you this, but I think you know this, that you're scanning these also to see if there are any looming questions that we need to answer. If people were bringing questions back. I see a lot of, I see a question in there that I'll put out there about what measures of belongingness have evidence of reliability. Do we know an answer to that? I know there are a couple instruments that the PERT survey out of Stanford and then the Search Institute are two survey instruments that have been validated of sorts, but are there others that we would sort of suggest or recommend? Bob, do you know of any others? Or if others in the room do want to drop those in. I see folks are excited about sharing the Maslow visual relationships are the chicken soup. Appreciate all the things that people are bringing back to the larger room. And we got an answer. Thank you to Amanda. The answer from before when we left was a question about looking for funding for the National Partnership for Student Success. And so there's a link there for people who are looking for that. We can add links. These two things, that's what I just talked about. All right, well, thank you all for bringing these things to us. Hopefully it was an engaging opportunity. Amanda, if you could advance for us, I just want to look forward. We're really glad that you're here and we want you to join us again if you can, and bring more friends with you. So the next community of practice meeting will be on August 31st. Again, a similar time. And we will share details shortly about what that will be about. We're actually going to share the details about what the community of practices will be going forward, so you have a better sense of what the topics are at each of these. So please stay tuned for that. And we also are going to ask for some feedback from you. So in the next link, speaking of topics and feedback, we'd love for your input on how to shape our community and have this be a really useful space for people, because that's what we'd like it to be. So if you could take 3 minutes to give us some feedback really quickly on the survey. And at the end of the survey, there's an opportunity to ask you if there's anything else we should know. Please feel free to drop ideas if there are things that you'd like for us to bring forward or have in this space. We welcome your input on that, because again, we want it to be as useful as possible to people. Couple of things also just for next steps. I didn't say this, but we will share the slides from today, and we'll share a recording of this if there's others that you want to, share this with. And we'll also share the links that have been shared in the chat. So there's been a lot of information flowing around, and so we'll make sure that those are all available to people. So stay tuned for a post-meeting survey or post-meeting email that will have all of that for you. And I will also want to close with something that you're going to do. So I think we heard a lot of the things in the waterfall, but also folks that you talked about. But what's one thing that you could do next Monday? All of us, wherever we sit in our systems, have at least, and I'm borrowing from Becky Margiotta here at the Billions Institute, but we all have at least 3 feet of the influence. We can influence something that we do, but what's one thing that you're able to do to hopefully work towards and advance student connectedness in the work that you do? And it might be a conversation that you have. It might be, sharing this conversation with other people. But what's one thing that you could do that would hopefully advance student connectedness? And I want to also close with a big thank you to Bob. Thank you for presenting here. Really appreciate it. I always learn a lot from you. It's always resource rich. And thank you to Amanda. A big shout out to Amanda for all your orchestrating and making sure that things go really smoothly and people have what they need. And for those that want to know more about the GRAD Partnership, so if this is something that you're interested in and more that you want to be involved with, because there's more besides our community practice and ways to get involved, please do so. You can visit the website here that's there, and you can also send us a note if you have questions or want to talk to anyone that's part of the GRAD Partnership. We'd love to have more conversations with people. So thank you so much for being here and for spending your time with us, and we look forward to continuing to learn with you and to work on this important work together. So thank you.
Be well and get connected.